Every major city has its temples of finance, towering structures of glass and steel built on the bedrock of trust. We entrust them with our life savings, our dreams, our entire financial futures. But what happens when that trust is betrayed? Not by a high-flying CEO, but by an unassuming middle manager, a man who, by all appearances, was just like you and me. If you enjoy this story, please leave a like, and please share it with your fellow true crime enthusiasts. To hear more of these stories, subscribe. This is the story of Peter Granger, a 45-year-old manager at Gramercy Bank, one of the nation's most respected financial institutions. He lived in a quiet suburban home with his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage children. He coached his son's soccer team, attended PTA meetings, and spent his weekends meticulously tending to his garden. To his neighbors, his colleagues, even his family, Peter Granger was the epitome of stability, predictability, a model citizen. But behind the meticulously curated facade of normalcy, Peter Granger harbored a secret, a demon that would drag him into a world of shadow, deceit, and ultimately put him on the run from forces more powerful and ruthless than he could ever have imagined. This is the story of how Peter vanished, leaving behind a trail of stolen millions, a bewildered FBI, and a furious international drug cartel. This is the story of the ghost of Gramercy Bank. Peter's secret wasn't a hidden mistress or a second life in another city. It was far more insidious, far more destructive. Peter Granger was a high-stakes gambler. It began innocently enough, friendly poker nights that escalated into online casinos and then, inevitably, into private underground games where the bets and the potential losses could erase a man's entire future. He'd been good at first, smart, calculating, able to read people just like in his banking career. But the addiction, as it always does, took hold. The thrill of the win, the despair of the loss, the desperate chase to recoup what was lost. He burned through his savings, maxed out credit cards, and even took out personal loans against his home, all hidden meticulously from Sarah. He was a master of financial subterfuge, a skill he was unknowingly honing for a much darker purpose. Then came the night that changed everything. Peter found himself at an exclusive private game, deep within the city's underbelly. These weren't your average high rollers. These were men with cold eyes, expensive suits, and an air of quiet menace. Peter lost. He lost big. A sum that wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was a black hole that would swallow his entire life. Over $100,000, a debt he had no earthly way of paying back. The man across the table from him, a well-dressed figure with an unblinking stare, wasn't just a gambler. He was a silent partner in the game, a man known only as Mr. Vega, an enforcer for a major international drug cartel. Vega didn't demand immediate payment. He knew exactly who Peter was and where he worked. He had a different kind of deal in mind, a deal that would solve Peter's immediate problem but ensnare him in something far more dangerous. Vega's offer was chillingly simple. Peter's debt would be cleared. In return, he would use his position as manager of international transfers at Gramercy Bank to facilitate a few transactions. Peter, terrified of exposure, of financial ruin, of what these men might do to him and his family, agreed. He truly believed it was a one-time arrangement, a desperate act to escape the crushing weight of his gambling addiction. He was about to learn just how naive he had been. The cartel's money was dirty, generated from a global network of illicit activities. Peter's job was to filter it, to wash it, to make it appear clean, legitimate. He did this through a sophisticated scheme of co-mingling funds. His role as manager of international transfers gave him the perfect cover. He had the authority to approve massive multi-million-dollar transactions for Gramercy Bank's largest corporate clients. The cartel would provide him with large sums of cash, often in multiple structured deposits, or through seemingly legitimate business fronts. Peter would then inject this cash into the bank's own revenue streams. When a legitimate multi-million-dollar transfer was processed for, say, a tech giant or a shipping conglomerate, Peter would subtly inflate the invoice amounts or add phantom service fees or operational costs, a fraction of a percent of the total transfer. These tiny additions on such massive transactions were virtually invisible to a standard audit. On paper, the transfers looked perfect, the numbers added up, the documentation was in order. But that tiny, almost imperceptible percentage was pure profit for the cartel, now cleansed and moved into their legitimate accounts. Peter Granger, the unassuming middle manager, had become a ghost in the machine, a vital, indispensable link in a global criminal enterprise. He believed he was simply a pawn, trapped in a game he couldn't control. But Peter was about to show them all just how good a player he truly was. Peter had started as a desperate man, forced into a corner. But the more he worked for the cartel, the more he understood their operation, and the more he saw an opportunity. His gambler's instinct, honed over years of high-stakes play, kicked in. He wasn't just a pawn, he was a player. He realized two crucial things about his new employers. First, the sheer volume of money the cartel was moving was immense. They were focused on the big numbers, the multi-million-dollar transfers, the overall bottom line. A tiny discrepancy, a mere fraction of a percentage, would be beneath their notice. Second, the cartel was utterly ruthless. He wasn't a temporary contractor, he was an asset. And assets, once compromised or no longer useful, are eliminated. He wasn't just in trouble, he was a dead man walking if he stayed. This was Peter's turning point. He began to plan his escape. Not a desperate, last-minute flight, but a long con, executed with the same meticulous detail he applied to his gardening. He continued to launder money for the cartel, moving their dirty cash through Gramercy Bank's international transfer system. But now he was running two schemes at once. He started siphoning off a small, almost undetectable percentage of the money he was laundering for the cartel itself. This wasn't bank money, this was the cartel's money. This was his true retirement fund, built slowly and methodically over the years. It was his insurance policy, his ticket to a new life, a ghost in the ghost accounts. He wasn't storing this money in easily traceable bank accounts. He was diversifying, moving it into untraceable assets, rare coins, valuable artwork, and eventually anonymous cryptocurrency wallets that could be accessed anywhere in the world. He was building his escape fund, a silent fortune that only he knew existed. He knew his scheme, both for the cartel and against them, couldn't last forever. He was simply waiting for the inevitable trigger. That trigger arrived in the form of Maria Rodriguez. Maria was everything Peter wasn't. Young, ambitious, fresh out of business school with a degree in forensic accounting and a hunger for detail that hadn't yet been dulled by corporate routine. She was a new hire in the internal audit department at Gramercy Bank, and she was assigned a deep-dive analysis of international transfers, a routine task that seasoned auditors often dreaded. Maria wasn't looking for obvious embezzlement, she was looking for patterns, anomalies, and 2 weeks into her audit she found them. Nothing that raised immediate concerns. But the deeper she looked, she began to identify patterns. In some transfers, the final dollar amount didn't perfectly match the sum of its sub-accounts. The discrepancies were microscopic, pennies, sometimes less. But in the world of high finance, every penny tells a story. She began to meticulously track these minor errors, building a digital spiderweb of data. Maria hadn't finished her audit, but she set a meeting with Bank President James Marshall to share preliminary findings. Marshall reviewed the audit and wasn't sure what Rodriguez had found. There was no smoking gun of fraud being committed, sure, small errors. But was it a fraud? Carelessness? Simple human error? Marshall told Rodriguez to keep digging. It was a week later, and Rodriguez met with Marshall again and laid out her findings. During this meeting, Rodriguez showed him that every single thread, every single discrepancy, led back to transfers approved by one person, Peter Granger. Peter was well aware of the audit that Rodriguez was conducting. She routinely asked him for documents to examine, questioned him about certain procedures, and each day Peter felt the walls of his years-long fraud closing in on him. He had to meet with Vega. Peter and Vega met at a bookie south of Dallas. Peter picked it because it was crowded and very public. He feared what would happen when he told Vega about the audit, and that he had to stop, at least for now. As Peter sat in Vega's Ford F-250 and explained that Rodriguez was conducting a routine audit and it appeared to be going well, he didn't think she would find anything out of the ordinary. He had been too careful, but he needed to pause the money laundering transfers. Vega responded, "Not good. You have been a vital part of our organization for years. My superiors will not be happy." Peter, nervous but confident, responded, "I'll be in touch." As Peter drove home back to his normal life, he knew it was time for his final act. Disappear. Because what he didn't know was that morning Marshall and Rodriguez had been meeting with FBI field agent Michelle Santos in a Starbucks in downtown Dallas. Rodriguez had laid out her audit and all of her findings to Santos, and she was stunned. The FBI had been building a case against the cartel's financial network for years. Maria's data provided the missing link, direct evidence of a money launderer right inside a major U.S. bank, connecting Gramercy to the very network they were targeting. The next morning at 6 a.m., Agent Santos and a team of agents arrived at the Granger house to serve a search warrant. When they entered the house, everything was in order. Food in the refrigerator, pots, pans, and dishes in the cabinets. Clothes in the closets, recent mail on the kitchen table. It seemed like the Grangers had just left to run errands. Little did she know at the time, the Grangers were never coming back to their quiet home. Simultaneously across town at Gramercy Bank, another team of agents were gathering boxes of banking records, computers, and anything else that may be potential evidence in what was to become one of the biggest banking scandals in recent history. Meanwhile, Bank President James Marshall sat in the lobby of his bank fielding angry phone calls, most likely from the board of directors and angry customers, because the raid was starting to hit the morning news. As the days passed after the raids, indictments came down and Vega was picked up. He immediately began to cooperate with the government against his superiors. Peter Granger was indicted on bank fraud, money laundering, wire fraud. It also looked like the government was going to try to fold this into an ongoing RICO case they were building against the cartel, and Peter had become a fugitive from justice. His car had been found abandoned on the side of Highway 35, about 20 miles north of Dallas. The FBI had put out be-on-the-lookout notices to all field offices. Agent Santos followed up on all leads that came in about Peter's whereabouts. A cashier in Oklahoma City may have spotted him pumping gas. A motel clerk in Missouri thinks he may have rented him a room. Santos gave a press conference updating the progress on the case. Peter's wife had shown up at their daughter's house in Austin and was promptly taken into custody by the FBI and interviewed. Both of their adult children were interviewed and put on around-the-clock surveillance. Peter's wife was eventually released and is staying with their daughter in Austin. Towards the end of the press conference, Santos vaguely insinuated that Peter's wife and children could be indicted as co-conspirators pending further investigation. Then Santos stared directly into the camera and stated, "Reach out to me, Peter. We need to talk, and remember, it's always better to be a witness than a co-defendant." Years have passed since Peter Granger disappeared. The case is officially cold. The money he stole from the cartel was never fully recovered, and Peter himself remains a phantom. No one knows what truly became of him. There are three leading theories, each as compelling and plausible as the last, each painting a dramatically different end to the story of the ghost of Gramercy Bank. The first theory, and perhaps the most grimly realistic, is the grave. The cartel is a global organization with long arms and an unforgiving memory. Betrayal and theft are crimes punishable by the harshest means. Many law enforcement officials believe that despite Peter's meticulous planning, the cartel eventually found him. He was a loose end who stole from them, a betrayal that could not go unpunished. His body, they believe, lies in some remote, unmarked location, a final brutal warning to anyone who dares to cross them. He's not living a life of luxury. He's a ghost in the ground, his story ending with a silent, terrifying finality. The money he stole, the very thing meant to save him, likely just led them to him faster. The second theory, the one we all want to believe, is the ghost. This theory suggests that Peter, the ultimate double-crosser and calculated risk-taker, successfully pulled off the impossible. He used the millions he stole from the cartel to buy a completely new identity and is now living a quiet, anonymous life in a remote, non-extradition country. He won the game. He exchanged a life of corporate pressure and secret addiction for one of sun-drenched solitude, free from the clutches of the FBI and the cartel. He's rich, he's free, but he's never truly at peace. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face, every unexpected sound could be a ghost from his past coming to claim what's theirs. He's a ghost in paradise, forever looking over his shoulder. But the third, and perhaps most compelling theory, is the witness. This theory suggests that when Peter disappeared, he didn't run from the FBI. He ran to them. He knew he couldn't outrun the cartel forever, that a life on the run, no matter how rich, was no life at all. He gambled one last time, making a deal. In exchange for his life, his safety, and perhaps even some protection for his family, he gave the FBI everything he knew about the cartel's financial network. He's now in witness protection, living a life of utter anonymity and quiet fear, a ghost not of his own making, but of the government's. The millions he stole from the cartel were the ultimate bargaining chip, the price of his new, silent existence. He lives in a small, unassuming town under a new name, a phantom, constantly aware that the past is always lurking. We may never know the true fate of Peter Granger. His story remains unsolved, a testament to the shadows that can exist even in the most brightly lit corners of our financial world. Was he a victim, a victor, or a ghost haunting the quiet corners of our collective imagination? The truth, like Peter Granger himself, remains just out of reach.